Welcome back to DeHaan on Fire, a YouTube channel and podcast featuring conversation, education, and commentary with Dr. John DeHaan. Brought to you by Firewise Learning Academy. Stoichiometric Ratio. See, it's a tongue twister, but it's something very important to be aware of when investigating explosions. And that's the topic of the question that we put to Dr. John DeHaan this week. DeHaan on Fire contains discussion and video not suitable for all audiences. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. And here we are again, Dr. DeHaan. Are you ready for another question?
All set. Good to hear from you again.
Okay, well, and it's always good to be with you. All right, this question has a bit of a tongue twister for me, and we'll see if it catches you. Jones and Bartlett's 5th edition Fire Investigator Manual describes the stoichiometric ratio as the perfect combustion condition. What is that?
Oh, well, stoichiometric mixture is the fancy 50-cent science word for ideal mixture. And it is a way of designating the mixture of oxygen or air and a fuel gas or vapor at which you have the perfect mixture such that when it functions, it releases the most energy in the shortest period of time. So you end up with a lot more serious blast effects and things like that. And when it's all over, you have neither residual oxygen or residual fuel. It's been the perfect chemical mixture for those two materials.
Can you give an example of a stoichiometric event that you investigated?
Well, we certainly have created a few in some of our tests, usually inadvertently. A stoichiometric mixture or ideal mixture produces the maximum amount of energy in the shortest period of time. So it produces the highest explosive effect. And you can sometimes sense that when you approach an explosion scene, for instance, and all the pieces are small and thrown long distances from a central point. And it's pretty exciting to be there when you have it, but it runs the highest risk of major damage. And so we have had a couple where the fire starts in a particular locale and then it gets into, for instance, I had a fatal explosion and fire in a residence, a wood frame structure on a concrete slab in a residential area, and the people could smell gas, but only when they walked outside the house. And so the gas company was there. They were trying to find out where this gas leak was, and the people were inside getting ready to go to a luncheon, and the lady finished getting her hair ready. As she walked out of the bathroom, she shut the lights off to the bathroom, and the explosive mixture of natural gas leaking from the pipeline in the front of the yard had actually penetrated under the slab and was coming up through the plumbing penetrations into the wall. So as she walked out, she saw the wall explode in flames. Luckily, she was in the doorway, so the flying debris missed her. But the real explosive mixture, much closer to the ideal mixture, was in the attic above. So when the fire propagated up through the wall and went through the top of the stud space, it ignited the mixture in the roof of the structure. It took the entire roof off the building and threw large pieces of the heavy roof, some 50 feet or more in all directions. And unfortunately, one of those pieces, large pieces, struck the homeowner who was outside at the sidewalk discussing the gas detection with a neighbor, and it killed him, injured the neighbor. And the burn patterns inside the house were very strange because there was more fire damage inside the wall cavities and inside the attic than anywhere else. And it was a good example of, concealed space, confined space, propagation, and then a much larger explosion when it was near the perfect limit. There are limits to the mixture of any combustible gas or vapor, and refer to the minimum concentration in air as being the lower explosive limit or the lower flammability limit. The two terms are largely used interchangeably because there's only a minor difference in the real measurement of those two qualities. And then you have a flammability range, and then eventually you get to an upper explosive limit or upper flammability limit, and beyond which there's too much fuel to support the combustion. So below the lower limit, there isn't enough fuel to support combustion, and above the upper limit, there's too much fuel and not enough oxygen. So the flame just doesn't propagate. And, for instance, natural gas has a flammability limit of, or flammability limits of something like 5 to 15%. The concentration actually determines the minimum ignition energy necessary to actually trigger the combustion. And the closer you are to the outer limits of that combustion range, the more energy that's required. And then beyond those limits, of course, there simply isn't enough energy typically to get them to ignite at all. But it's kind of a U-shaped curve. If you plot the concentration along the horizontal axis and the minimum energy required to ignite it along the vertical, it's kind of a U-shaped curve for most fuels. And right around the middle of that range for most materials, it reaches a minimum. And that means it's most sensitive to weak, even weak ignition sources. But when it goes, as I said, that's your ideal mixture. Maximum flame velocity, maximum explosive potential, and the highest temperatures. And for most fuels, like natural gas, it's right pretty close to the minimum, the middle of that range, around 10%, 9 to 10%, somewhere in there. There are exceptions, of course. Acetylene, for instance, has a kind of a non-uniform curve. It actually has a flammability limit from just a couple of percent to 81%. And technically, under some conditions, like if it's preheated, acetylene can go directly to a detonation. And so therefore, it has a 100% upper explosive limit, meaning it's really dangerous all the time. And firefighters have to be conscious of that, so that if they enter an industrial premise, for instance, there's been a large fire and the acetylene tanks are exposed to that heat and are now elevated in temperature, it can detonate under mechanical impact. That's how sensitive it can be. So, modern firefighters are taught to back way off and just hose keep hoses flowing on those tanks for hours before they attempt to move them.
And it's interesting, in the example that you gave of the gas explosion at the house, you had a different mixture of the same gas in different locations, although in close proximity. And I think a lot of people think when a house blows up because of natural gas, it was just the gas blowing up. But there's that whole different ratio that you can look at, I suppose, from the damage and the event to even trace the source.
Well, that's right. What room is the most badly damaged by not only the explosion but also the fire-related things? Because lean limit ignitions don't burn very long. I mean, they burn very quickly because you consume all the fuel very quickly, and there may not be anything visible from the outside back into the structure of the room, because it goes flash and it's all done. A rich limit now you have excess fuel, especially in pockets or depending on the material, either high or low in the room, and you get a post-blast fire that may last several seconds. And so when people hear the bang, they look over and they can still see fire flames trailing out of various locations. And so that's another giveaway as to what might have actually ignited.
So does the complexity of investigating such events or explosions, does that require an expertise or an extra training for fire investigators, or even the need to bring someone else in?
Well, yeah, because you're looking at explosive pressures, you have to understand how physical materials fail. You know, what happens when a glass window breaks from an overpressure event. I had a fatal fire some years ago, and it wasn't very subtle. The person had come in and poured gasoline across this small bedroom. And when it was set off, the door had been closed or almost closed, and the pressure was developed in the room, despite the richness of the mixture, was enough to lift the shed-type roof off of this house addition. And so there was a gap of 2 or 3 inches where the roof didn't meet the walls anymore. But the investigator, when he called me, he said, well, you know, it lifted the roof, but the window's still intact. Oh, that's odd, because normally glass windows have a lower failure pressure than the structural elements. Well, when I got there and I looked at the scene, it turned out that it was a fairly small window with a wooden frame dividing it into quarters. Glass fails when it stretches, and until it reaches its tensile limit, and then it shatters. Well, what had happened was that this small window with these extra wooden cross frames in it reduced the extendable limit kind of the glass, so it never reached a failure point. So the glass itself was still intact, but the roof had been lifted off, because you think, well, you know, with that structure, that window, you might have a explosive, you might have a failure limit of 1 psi. Well, that's not much pressure against this 18-inch or 24-inch square window. But what about the 10-foot by 8-foot section of roof? That's a lot of square inches. So that was enough accumulated pressure to lift the roof.
Have you subscribed to the channel yet? Please do so. Ring the bell to get notifications of new uploads. Don't forget to set your devices to receive those notifications. And as soon as we add content to the channel, you'll be alerted to the new content being there. So until next time, again, thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Dr. John DeHaan and Firewise Learning Academy, I'm Tim Davis. See you later.